This video's most likely going to be another one of my unpopular opinion videos. I don't believe I'm going to get most people to agree with me on what I have to say. Before I go any farther, I am part of the millennial generation. I'm currently 25 as of uploading this video. Obviously that means I have a bias about my generation, but I also wholeheartedly disagree with different parts of my diverse generation. I think we're the hardest generation to generalize given the fact that we grew up through the technology boom and remember the time before the internet, the dawn of the internet, and everything up to now. We were around for the time of landlines before there were cell phones, we were around for the first cell phones, the first smartphones, and every up to now. Technology has improved faster during our lifetime thus far than for any previous generation. Not to mention the fact that we had access to more information than any of the previous generations did at our age. Our generation saw more change during our childhoods than any generation before us. Because of all of that, I think we're the most diverse generation thus far. Many of us are still stuck with the same ideas our parents and their parents had thanks to their lack of access to information and differing points of view that challenge their perceptions of things, but just as many, and probably more every day, are able to think and act differently from all the generations before us. It's definitely a combination of things that made our generation not just rebel against our parents, because generation has always done that in some form or another during their childhood, but realized that our parents were wrong about a lot of things. We realized our parents and their parents really didn't know as much as they thought they did about the world. We realized that our parents had a tendency to just go along with what others around them told them and didn't bother to fact-check it. With the advent of the internet, and our generation being the first to learn to utilize it, we learned to question the things our parents taught and told us to see if it was true or lies based largely on ignorance. I had an unfair advantage growing up when it came to thinking differently from my parents because I'm highly intelligent, which was lucky. So when I learned to read at a young age, I also learned to distinguish between different handwriting styles and was able to tell that all the present from, quote, Santa, had the same handwriting as the ones from my mom. When I told her there's no way Santa could write the same way she does, nor would he leave our presents early and wrapped in the same paper as the ones from my parents, she didn't have a response and I knew Santa was a lie. By the way kids, Santa's a lie, just think about it for a second. Anyway, what does this have to do with us thinking differently from our parents and why did you throw in that smug remark about being so intelligent, you might be wondering. To that, I would have to say that discovering Santa was a lie at such a young age made me immediately suspect everything my parents told me. I had already learned the tooth fairy wasn't real and neither was the Easter bunny earlier that year. When no one had any answers to my questions about the contradictory things in the Bible, yeah, I only read about half of the Bible. It's long, boring, and a terrible work of fiction. If it tried to be released in the modern day, no one would buy that incoherent trash, but religion bashing is coming in another video. I stopped believing in anything the Christian church wanted to say. And I began to suspect that many of them were either not that intelligent if they believed in that nonsense, or they knew it was nonsense and were lying to everyone for some reason. I was a cynical, skeptical child, but no one who grew up with me would have known that. I kept all of these opinions to myself until recently and I'm sharing them all with you through these unpopular opinion videos. I want to be clear that I am aware of my skewed viewpoint and that not everyone will see things the way I do because not everyone had the same experiences I did. I'm not trying to complain about my experiences. I actually am grateful that I grew up in a family of scheming liars of average intellect. It helped me put things in perspective that most people don't and won't see the world the way I do. Nor should you try to be as skeptical as I am, it will permanently warp the way you view the world and what good is that to you. Back to the point, my childhood certainly contributed to my questioning of pretty much everything the older generations say and do, but the other major contributing factor was obviously the internet. Having access to so many different points of view from around the world makes it harder to just blindly accept what people from previous generations who didn't have the same access as you I always looked at it this way: I was being taught from textbooks at first, and we obviously still use them in school, but we use them in combination with computers and the internet. It's not all just learning out of old books written by people who were taught not just out of books even older than the one you're using, but by someone who learned everything they knew from textbooks and people older than the ones they're using. And it goes on and on back through time for over a century. Each generation before ours was taught out of books written by people who learned from books that had long since become outdated. These days, we can learn, improve, and correct mistakes in textbooks that get disproven or no longer have relevance as the information they're teaching has been replaced by more efficient methods faster than we can make the textbooks. And again, we don't rely on them as much anymore for that very reason. Add to that the fact that many textbooks available for the older generations were far more regionalized than they are today, and far less complete. I'm thinking largely of historical lessons we learned about in school that many of them would not have known as much about. It's impossible for them to have kept up with all the events going on in the world back then given the level of technology available to them. Not to mention all the scientific discoveries made during or after their schooling, that many of them never would have learned about. Think about it. Certain events that happened and required the changing of textbooks nationwide wouldn't have been able to be taught until they actually were put into the new textbooks and added to the curriculum. And think about it some more: do you really think most Americans who were our age back then that weren't in college continuing their education would have sought this knowledge out? Keep in mind that these are the same generations who were paying so little attention or had such little access to information or cared so little about the world around them, that they allowed our government to become as corrupted as it has become in our lifetime. We weren't around in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or the 80s when all of this was happening. I was born in the 90s, some of us were in grade school then, and I graduated in 2010, so we weren't able to do anything about Bush and the Iraq War. We're finally becoming able to get involved in politics and take control of our government again, and we're having to fight not only all the corruption that has built up and entrenched itself on their watch, but we have to deal with many of them trying to pretend as if we're lazy, stupid, and it's our fault and responsibility to fix all the problems of the world. They, not all, like to talk about how easy we have it, while ignoring all the damage they did by either ignoring the corruption spreading within our government, or actively helping it along. The problems we're facing today: global climate change, worldwide corruption, all the wars America is in, the dangerous uranium power plants we have all over the nation instead of walk-away safe, non-explosive thorium power plants, the healthcare crisis in this country, the war on drugs, the private prison industry, the insane stagnation of wages, and more. All of it is their fault. By not getting involved, by not paying attention, by not doing anything about it or anything to stop it, they are just as complicit as those within their generations who actually did the horrific things and implemented the terrible policies that have plunged the world into this state. We're just now getting to the point where our generation is able to get involved and bring about real, positive change, and we're getting smeared by the very generations who were unwilling or unable to do the same thing when they were our age. Which brings me to my final point: ours is the greatest generation. We have the best shot at fixing the messes made by the previous generations and not to make the same mistakes they made and keep making. We're definitely going to have a tough challenge on our hands, as many in my generation already know. But we can make sure no future generation has to suffer with the lies and misinformation learned, taught, and spread by the older generations. And that last comment isn't meant to berate or degrade them, it is the sad fact of the time they were born in. It's simply not possible for them to have had access to as much information as we do. Which is why many of them are less intelligent than us, more stubborn than us, more misinformed than us, and more uninformed overall than us. To my fellow millenials, can you imagine how difficult it would have been to keep up with current events and learn new things without the internet like all the older generations had to? Is it any wonder most of them chose to focus on working and family and completely ignored everything the government was doing? All they had access to was local information for the oldest generations, and even the most recent ones only really had access to American television and radio, both of which were either locally located and focused, or were run by huge companies like GE, who were a defense company. Propaganda being spewed in their faces on the TV, told to them on the radio, and read about in the local paper makes it hard to hear outside points of view and differing points of view. And for those of you who want to pretend propaganda wasn't being spewed on television before it was more heavily regulated, with laws about not blatantly lying to customers to trick them into buying your products, I would refer you to the classic Looney Tunes. They've been around longer than most Americans alive today, and if you go back and watch the old episodes, not only will you notice the racist stereotypes blatantly displayed, but certain episodes literally have subliminal messaging in them. One episode with Bugs Bunny has a huge billboard with the word, "smoke," to trick kids into smoking. Stuff like that was commonplace. They had so much working against them, and unlike us, they didn't have technology that allowed them to know what was going on all over the world or to fact-check what the government was telling them if they even bothered to listen to what was going on in politics for most of their lives. Which is why I feel a little bad for blaming them for all the societal problems we are facing today, even if it's completely true. I know many of them never had a chance. Unfortunately, though, that also makes it hard to listen to them when they try to act like they know more than us. Simply being alive for a long time doesn't mean you know more than those who haven't lived as long as you, in case anyone needed reminding. One last time, I bring up my lack of access to information argument. They didn't have access to as much or as accurate information for most of their lives as we have had during ours. And with that, I'm going to end this video. It has gone on for a little longer than I expected, and I want to know what you all think before I continue much further. What are your thoughts? Do you agree or disagree, and with what things in particular? Please leave any questions or comments you have in the section below. And stay safe till next time. Error. 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 File.